quarter in over 3 to 4 years where they've had any reduction in sales. So the whole idea of marketing and living your purpose and your why has been exemplified by many, many different corporations, and using the love theme as a theme for power, really generating compassion and love has been very successful. As a matter of fact, when we had our first child, we actually bought a Subaru because we wanted something that we believed was safe for the family. So we actually made a $30,000 decision based upon their marketing and their advertising. So that's the first concept, first stage. If we went back to our 6 stages, talking about how we change ourselves and then how we change our organization. So how you do this is clearly you need the right people, the right leaders who are committed. You need to change your mindset, and you need to incorporate those values and then create a differentiating value proposition, which we're just trying to hint about in our discussion of the value proposition and forming the transformative why and the elevator pitch. So now we're going to begin looking at the next stage of how we face that and how we begin to translate this into more of an external strategy. Next slide, please. So we need to look at the situation in the world and how the world is going to begin to affect our company and our brand. Currently, we're looking at 4 major factors which are going to drive transformation in the world. And how are we as leaders going to respond to that and adjust our why and our how and our what to this need in the world? Clearly, we're facing major crises. The global pandemic, the economic threat, the climate threat. This is affecting everybody in the world, and it's transforming who they are. And we're going to talk about that continuing through the rest of the discussion. The people in the world are different. The major market is the next generation. Women are taking a very, very different role in the world, and the people who are marginalized, the people of different colors in the world, different identities in a different world, they are screaming to have their voices heard. The voices heard through voting, and as we go down to the next one, in the market, through purchasing power, and the role what brand is going to be telling. So the expectations of this rising voices in the next generation and the clientele and the people as a whole who are experiencing these global impacts are changing. The whole idea of brand, as you will realize, is being transformed right in front of our leaders' eyes. And how are we responding to that transformation? Are we going to wait and see and deal with the status quo, or are we going to be leaders of it? And the fourth element in this transformation is that some businesses are beginning to adopt it. There was 180 leaders called the Business Roundtable, which actually changed their charter to say that their focus as CEOs was going to be on focusing on all the stakeholders and creating a quadruple bottom line or impact that not only was on focusing on their profit, was also focusing on their community, on the planet. So we're getting sort of a synergy of factors. There's an external crisis. There's a new set of people in the world who are many of whom will be our employees, our talent in the future, who are being mobilized to vote, and they're going to have the power to purchase. And there's a different set of expectations in the world around what our role as a brand and as a company and how we should live and exercise these ourselves in the marketplace. And then business as a whole is rising up and taking a different role in this transformation. So let's take the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So over the last 20 years, the Richard Edelman group created a thing called the Trust Barometer. And annually, they surveyed major markets in of people's attitude to trust in 4 different institutions: business, government, media, NGOs, and to see what they're doing right. The level of trust in the last 5 years has totally evaporated. It used to be at 65 to 70%. Most of the most trusted nations are the Scandinavian nations, and some of the least trusted nations are some of the countries in Latin America. But the major European countries, some of the Middle Eastern countries, and North American countries have been in the 65, 62% ratio of how many people believe that they were trusted, their businesses, their government, their media, and the NGOs have trusted. In the last 2 to 3 years, 2/3 of those surveys have become distrusted. Less than 50% of the population trusted these mainstream institutions. That's signaling that we need a transformation and a realignment. And the conclusion of their 2020 report, which we'll get back to a little bit later, is the onus is now on business, the one institution that retains some trust among those skeptical of the system, to prove that it's possible to act in the interest of all the stakeholders and the society alike, the shareholders and the society alike. So this is what the vision and the planning has to understand. We have to understand what's threatening us, what crises are there, the new populations, and the level of trust that we're facing in the world, both in our country and globally. So next slide, please. Next slide, please.
It's already there. Can you see it?
Yes? Oh, okay, it didn't come up. Thank you. So let's get back just very briefly. So we've given you a snapshot on the left-hand side of the forces, the leadership, the culture, and the vision, and the crises we're facing, as how we as an organization have to respond to that internally. And the rest of our discussion is going to be on this transformation of the brand. Of course, we need to go into the business model, the operations, and the impact, but that'll be done in future sessions. So we're going to look at external transformation in terms of the brand and what the focus is. Next slide, please. So we're going to look at trust, this discussion that the Edelman barometer has pointed out, and so many other companies have done research, major consulting companies, as really the currency of transformation. And what do we mean by currency? It's the way we exchange, what we exchange. We're exchanging our trust for a product, and it has to be an ingredient in how we're communicating with people, how companies and organizations communicate with them, how we understand who the company is and who we're dealing with, and it evolves what they've called now in the branding business is brand trust or brand love and brand loyalty. People are demanding a new level of trust and a new level of an experience and a new level of role to purchase a product, to vote for a candidate, or to adopt a new idea. So everything is transforming, and we need to be aware of it and see how we, as a leader, an entrepreneur, fit into and use this trust as a vehicle to be transformative in our company. So let's look at 3 different views of brand. Next slide, please.
It's already on the screen.
Yeah, it didn't come up. Okay, so the next slide, did it come up? Okay, so the next slide, the next slide is talking about in the whole marketing and business field about the world we're currently facing, the world of chaos, the world of pandemics, and the future world of climate threat. And all the business leaders saying we need to transform, but we're going to do it through a brand pivot. We're going to pivot our brand to make it more receptive to the people that they're speaking to. And this is being contrasted with a group of people, including myself and others, who are saying we just can't pivot because the transformation that's demanded and the people that are demanding it is much too strong, and the crises are much too demanding. It requires a whole different way of looking at ourselves and our organization, and that's called brand transformation. So if we look at the brand pivot, which many companies now who are opening restaurants and opening their medium-sized businesses, and even many Fortune 500 companies are transforming the way they present themselves, it's often in a transactional mode. They're looking to capture more of the market, which they either had or they lost, or they were on hold because of quarantine, instead of really trying to reflect on their brand and their why and their purpose to really open up new doorways. It's sort of getting back to the story of the jester. You have to look at that key as a source of power for transformation. And that key is the why, is the purpose, and how we make that purpose a reality, and how we convert the why into something that's more of a trusted element of our company. In the brand pivot model, often the change is very incremental. It promotes more, it maintains the status quo, and it really evolves what is really being called the new normal. I really don't like that comment, because every time I think of the normal, I think that we're satisfied with what we're getting. And I don't think many of us are very satisfied. And the market itself is saying that we want transformation. So we're trying to find a different level of harmony, which is a co-creation of our stakeholders, among all our stakeholders and our institutions, to create a feeling of trust and to explore some new boundaries and some new opportunities for solutions. So the next slide, please. So if we look at a traditional brand, we're looking at that's driven by profit and driven by the interest of the company. It's usually based upon performance and status, self-identity, and the value that you create through your product or service, maybe an NGO or a for-profit. We're saying that right now, there's a need for the second level, which is the purposeful brand, which is intent-driven. We try to, as we went through the first set of slides, is to refine and transform the mindset of the leader and the mindset of the organization to be able to transmit a different purpose. So the first thing we need to do is align our values with the purpose, the leaders, and that's why we created that canvas called the transformative why. Is basically what we're trying to do is say we have certain values and we have certain passions and certain core competencies, and how do we really translate that into a purpose like the Apple purpose, which lives through our whole product line and our whole messaging. The second thing that happens with the band, the purposeful brand, is that it's proclaimed. The purpose is proclaimed and not just hidden. I think Jahan made a very good example of really proclaiming the ethics and the fairness and the joint collaboration for the benefit of all of the stakeholders in that concept. But at this point, the purposeful brand is really just proclaiming. It also has to try to fulfill the changing role and expectations of the consumer in this vastly changing world. So there's a huge sensitivity of leadership and the management team